Counting down. We are back. Another episode of the Golden V podcast. It is Thursday, May 29th, 2025. Exactly one day before the CFL preseason continues. And I'm following, obviously, closely on this podcast, the BC Lions preseason game against the Edmonton Elks. But I've got a guest with me who is currently a free agent in the CFL and played for the Edmonton Elks last year. That's Scott Hutter, who played on defense for Edmonton. Scott, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So just checking in with you, seeing what's going on. Obviously, you want to do a little bit of a preview, and we mentioned it before we started, just a little bit about what people can expect in a preseason game. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, preseason football is always really fun, right? Because you have guys getting their first opportunity to fight for a job and show in some positions that they might not get an opportunity for the rest of the year as starters on offense and defense, right? So definitely going to be some interesting watches.
Yeah, and it was interesting because when I had Julio Caravetta on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about that too. And I believe his angle was, he said, you have one quarter, he told me, to prove yourself sometimes in the preseason. Mm-hmm. One full quarter in amongst all the days of training camp. And I get the Lions daily lining, training camp updates, and maybe you can elaborate a bit more on how a training camp works once I finish this point, because I thought that was really interesting, right? I mean, I know nothing about what it's like to be a player. That's why you're here. Obviously, we met last year at Vancouver's Grey Cup. What's that like to be in a preseason game or be in a preseason training camp?
Well, I mean, training camp is definitely a grind mentally and physically. You're putting in, 12, 13-hour days sometimes at the facility.
Right.
But that's part of it. And you're going through it with the group of guys, with the team. So you lean on each other, and that's really where teams start to come together to begin the year. As far as preseason games go, game plans are going to be a little more basic. There's not going to be any coaches wanting to show all of their cards per se, or scheme up a specific player or team. But so you'll see a lot of base defense, a lot of base offense, and you'll get a quarter, a half, maybe a full game if a coaching staff really is interested in you and wants to pursue seeing your talent level. But you just, as a player, you have to go out and execute the assignment for as long as you get. As the old saying goes, you don't count your reps, you make your reps count.
Right. Good saying. I didn't know that. Yeah. All these little tidbits I learned from you guys, right? This is why I talk to you guys. This is why I get you on the podcast, because I have my perspective as a fan. I go deeper and deeper into understanding the CFL game, and I've watched it for a long time, but this is a whole other way of looking at it, right? And I think that's one of the things I always try to bring to the podcast, is trying to get more and more knowledge and deeper insight into how the game actually works. And I've heard guys say that too. Sometimes that they don't think the fans really understand what it's like to be in that experience. And I mean, that's tough, right? 12, 13 hours a day, workouts, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the preseason game tomorrow night too, because there's a BC Lions preseason game tomorrow against the Edmonton Elks at Commonwealth Stadium. Obviously, a place you know very well. What's the atmosphere going to be like in a place like Commonwealth Stadium for a preseason game? Is there going to be any interest there?
Yeah, no, definitely. It might see a little bit of a reduced interest this year in particular, because the Oilers are having such a deep playoff run in the NHL. But no, people get excited for the CFL in Edmonton. People get excited for the CFL in all nine cities across Canada, right? So this is the first chance that the home crowd is going to get to see the 2025 iteration of the Edmonton Elks. And the 2025 iteration of the BC Lions as well. It's preseason football, so there'll be some mistakes, there'll be some errors on both sides of the football, both teams. But sometimes that's what makes it preseason football interesting as well.
Right, and I was actually just looking at some stuff from 3 Down Nation here too, because there's some interesting previews here on the Elk side about their free agent lineup in the final preseason game. Looking at some guys they brought in, Royce McKechnie, cornerback Terrell Ford, Robbie Smith, Brandon Barlow. And I actually noticed that it looks like they just changed their kicker to halfback Manny Rugamba, who played in BC.
Mhm.
Obviously, quarterback, experienced veteran quarterback like Cody Fiordo. Um, and obviously Alexander Hollins, who also came from the BC Lions. So that Elks team
Yeah,
looks interesting, obviously, right? With a Canadian quarterback like Trey Ford. Any other thoughts on them a little
absolutely.
bit?
Yeah, no, I think they're definitely a team to watch this year. Mark Killam coming over from Calgary, he was the special teams coordinator, very well respected coach uh, for
Right.
years in Calgary. Now gets the opportunity to be a head coach in the CFL, and I think he's going to have the guys ready to play. I think he's definitely going to have the new players understanding what it means to play in Edmonton, and there are some returning players that will help along with that as well. They did play a couple weeks ago and lost to Calgary by a couple scores. But the way the CFL training camps and preseason usually work is your road game is usually when you tell the starters, hey, you're not going to play this game. And then the home game is when you're going to trot out your starting lineup for a quarter or a half and see how that goes. So this game is in Edmonton. It's a home game for them. So they'll be trotting out the starters and so we'll see how they look.
Yeah, I actually did manage to find the Edmonton depth chart too, which is great on Through Down Nation because it gives me an idea. Obviously, Trey Ford, a quarterback, Cody Fiordo, second. I'm just looking at if there's any other familiar names that I recognize there. I mentioned a few. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about what's going on with you. The status here, free agency, what's happening there. Any teams in interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So for any of your listeners that don't know, I underwent ACL reconstruction surgery last September.
Right.
So I'm right at the 9 month mark, and doctors usually say 9 to 12 months is the recovery window to
Okay.
return to sport. So we're just treading along like any injured athlete or athlete rehabbing an injury. Just trust what the doctors say, be the best friend of the physiotherapist and the chiropractor and anyone that can get their hands on you. So
Yeah.
just treading along, and I don't expect to be out of the game for too much longer.
Yeah, I guess I'd forgotten about the surgery, and I don't know if that impacts you becoming a free agent. I don't know how that part of it works, but that seems kind of tough because, as you know, the injury is the injury, right? And then you've obviously the season is starting. Um, One thing too about this game tomorrow night. I mean, obviously the season starts the following week. We know how long the season is. Obviously, the Grey Cup wasn't until late November in Vancouver. Um, but sort of like, what's on your mind right now? Obviously, rehabbing and the injury. And the question I had was, even with the preseason game, based on what you know, how much is there a lot of scrambling between, say, a preseason game and for teams to get ready for week one, even if it's only week one, if they see a bunch of deficiencies in a final preseason game?
Yeah, I mean, rosters are always in motion, right?
Right.
I think just over the number of years I've been in CFL locker rooms, week to week, there's always additions, subtractions from the roster.
Yeah.
GMs are always tinkering, right? So
Right.
I don't think necessarily it's any different from preseason to week one as it would be week 13 to week 14 of a CFL
Right.
season. But
Right.
it's always in motion. It's always being tinkered with.
Right. Yeah, because it's always something I found interesting, and I follow as a fan. Like I said, now I'm getting more in depth, and so trying to understand these little parts of it, right? Because it's probably things that fans don't see, and it's things that fans may or may not understand, depending on their perspective and the closeness to a team, like a player or a staff member. Let's get into some start to the regular season. I know there's some odds floating around that I've seen various places about who's going to win the West. Obviously, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have the best odds um, to win the West this year. I think BC was third, Edmonton fourth, Calgary fifth, and obviously Saskatchewan second, based largely, I think, on how the West ended up last year, leading into the Grey Cup. What are your thoughts on the West this year?
I think the Western Division is really tight. I mean, it was tight last year as well.
Right.
I know in Edmonton we started off very slow. I don't think we got our first win until week 9 or 10. But by the end of the year, we had rallied back and we were, 1 or 2 games out of a playoff spot. And that's the reality of a league with 9 teams. And, only a couple of those teams don't make the playoffs every year. So the reality is that, again, another old CFL saying that the season doesn't start until Labor Day. Now, coaches and players know that that's not true, but as far as playoff races and fan interest goes, Labor Day is when the schedule starts to get a little more intense and the standings start to solidify into who's going to get those first round buys and who's going to be the playoff teams. So we'll see who comes out on top when that's all said and done. But I do think the West is a very close division this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always is, right? And obviously the Grey Cup winner came out of the East, and Toronto. I was there, like you were. Just trying to, there's a couple other things I had for you. So, what's your timeline then to get back from your injury? You mentioned it's a 9 to 12 month thing. Any more thoughts on that? Where do you think?
Well, I mean, thank God for doctors is all I'll say about that. I mean, whenever you have a season-ending injury or have to go through some sort of surgery, it's always scary and pretty concerning as an athlete when that's your livelihood. But I've been really impressed with the people that I've dealt with over this past 9-month period. From learning how to walk again to actually becoming an elite athlete again. So it's it's a process, but we're getting there, and I won't make any predictions on where I'll end up because like I said, things are always fluid.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at the CFL overall, any other thoughts on the CFL this season? Stuff you're hearing, interesting storylines. And we should cover the East too, right? Because this is sort of like,
I think it's going to be a great CFL season. I mean, you just look at the star power as just in the quarterback category. Out west, Nathan Rourke, Trey Ford, Trevor Harris, Zach Caleros, and Vernon Adams Jr.
Yeah,
and that's just in the Western teams. Right. If you go out east, you have a Hall of Famer in Bo Levi Mitchell. You have the Toronto quarterback room with Chad Kelly. I don't think he's going to be ready for week 1, but coming off of a broken leg in last year's East final. You have Davis Alexander in Montreal, who's getting the starting job for the first time this season, right? Yeah. And you have in Ottawa Drew Brown, second year at the helm. Last year brought Ottawa to the playoffs. Can they go a little bit further? Can they make a run at the Cup? So I think there's endless amounts of storylines going on this year, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, me too. And it's always good to get you on again. Thanks for doing this. We can wrap it up there for a quick preview because I like to get CFL player insights on a lot of this kind of stuff at this point in the season, right? And the CFL season is long, starting on first week of June, and it's still going into November, and it's 5-6 months into the season, right? So thanks again.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for doing this, Scott. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Anytime, Ben.